Mr. Speaker, in status quo, the world we live in and the happiness that is accrued from that world is one that is based on a person's ability to perceive what happiness really means to them. When these individuals are not given the access towards these happiness that they so once want in their lives, we don't think it's a life worth living. Let me give you the definition of today's debate. We define cryogenic freezing as a type of freezing which requires extremely low temperatures. By using it, it is possible, in theory, to keep an object frozen without any aging-related loss in that object. For example, we do it for plants, and in some countries, people are allowed to cryogenically freeze their heads or their bodies. The stance coming from this side of the house is that people should be able to live their lives the way that they want, take decisions with calculated risks, and make rational decisions in achieving or in accruing the happiness that they so wanted. What is the policy? 4 prongs. Firstly, we will allow anyone above the age of consent or the legal age to cryogenically freeze themselves at any point of their lives. No thank you. So children must receive the consent of their parents if they were to join as well. Secondly, once you've cryogenically frozen yourself, people have to pay upfront for the cost that it will take to maintain the body cryogenically. However, for those who cannot afford them, governments will give access and subsidies. For example, we would relate cryogenic freezing akin to healthcare. And also we subsidize the facial reconstruction of a person that has suffered from burns. No thank you. Thirdly, we will flood the media with anything truthful about cryogenic freezing. We'll tell them about the cost, we'll tell them about the risk, we'll tell them the benefits that they will accrue. Nothing mendacious. Fourthly, no thank you. If they want, people will be able to pick a date in which they want their body to be resurrected. So people can also place a certain amount of cash in their bank so they won't be left with nothing when they have been resurrected. No thank you. What are some clarifications in order to make this debate as clear as possible? We think that this debate is not about whether cryogenic freezing will work, it's about the person's right to do so. We don't want to argue on technical terms on the ability to cryogenically freeze. So for example, people are able to consent to high-risk surgeries and possibly not make it out alive even if that surgery has a possibility of doing so. First argument, on happiness, and why we need to ensure that the most number of people are able to access it. No thank you. Firstly, we think that governments nowadays allow people to access choices of existing into giving them the ability to maximize their happiness that they can accrue in life. For example, people are allowed to work in harmful places like being a miner in the caves, or they can rock climb. They can accrue all happiness from all these things when it comes with a pretty high risk to match the entertainment and excitement from it. No thank you. But secondly, even if there is no certified benefit, we allow people to make choices out of the perceived happiness that comes with it. We allow the purchasing of the sale of sugar pills. We allow people to take medical procedures even if it comes with high risk, knowing that they won't be able to survive in the long term. So this goes to show that in the eyes of a person, if an act a person makes receives happiness for a short or long time, even if it isn't based on concrete facts and numbers, we will allow them to still do so. No thank you. We think that secondly, within this choice, people have to make the evaluation and assessment and adjudication of the concern or in which the life that they are living in this world, and they have to come up with a decision that may or may not be worth it, and in that area of time. So no thank you. So regardless of the certainty of happiness that they may not maximize. So for example, you may wake up and realize once you have been cryogenically frozen, you've missed so many great things. So you should be allowed to wake up to that choice and to make that choice regardless whether or not it is possible or not. No thank you. But in the vast majority of circumstances, if resurrection is possible, people will wake up with their reasons or with their perceptions of happiness materializing and achieving its maximum potential. So for really old people, if they want to see their grandchildren grow up to be very successful individuals, we think they're more likely to be happy on the outside compared to theirs. No thank you. Also, let me clarify on how this cryogenic freezing work. So the aim of this is to maintain the consciousness of a person to one day resurrect, or to one day place them in a life that they so wanted in the long term. So this is a very legit choice in principle, and it allows a person the full agency to be who they want to be and to plan when they want to be that person. But even if this doesn't work in our worst case scenario, this is similar to brain surgery or other procedures that it is regrettable in the worst case. But in the place of time, the person made a rational choice to obtain that happiness. But before I move on to my second argument, sure.
Freezing yourself is an irreversible decision. Will you similarly legalize other choices like suicide?
Yes, we are okay with that. Second argument on why is opting out of this world or out of this world good. So, firstly, what does this world currently look like to individuals in status quo? We think that society is overwhelmingly packed with factors that prevent them from accruing the happiness that they want to accrue. When there is the pain of loss towards the individuals that are suffering on the ground, when there is a pain of loss towards murder or crimes that happen in status quo, we think that as a human, we empathize with those emotions, and as a result, we feel the pain and traumatize ourselves in the process. Secondly, there are media standards in status quo that force us into a cocoon of different personalities and looks that people can't opt out of. So we think that in status quo, there are social contracts that have been built by the media that influences people to opt into those lives. No thank you. And as a result, people aren't simply satisfied with their lives anymore. This is the side of the house that will force children, no thank you, that were born with microcephaly with their limited lifespan, where their brains cannot process happiness, but instead can process the pain that they have felt being born with such a disease. And at the same time, they force the parents of these children to not accrue the happiness that they so want in the very long term. So there are also people bound by current structures of the world. So for example, the lack of access to the most advanced methods of technology, to the other spectrum of conducive societies. We think that this means that individuals on the ground, this means that their genius or their ability to assess these types of decisions will forever be prohibited from materializing. And in the long term, the idea of materializing their happiness won't ever be achieved on their side. We have to be the side where we allow them to access the feature that they can be happy, that they can be living in the world that they want to live in. So we think that in the long term, under our side, people can achieve or can accrue the happiness that they want so perceive in their lives. We've never been proud to propose.
Thanks to Prime Minister, and I welcome the Leader of the Opposition.
It's very high.
Mr. Speaker, we think the choice to freeze yourself can never be rational, and it's a choice you need to protect individuals from making, because it hurts individuals and it hurts society as a whole. That's what we're going to stand for on side opposition. But before I move into like constructive or rebuttal, I want to point out that the PM's case is literally just, we want people to be happy, happy good, therefore freeze good. But above and beyond that, we also think that he's never once in his speech discussed what happens when you go to sleep. Are you going to like just sit there and like do nothing for like these 20 years? Is your brain going to degenerate? Which suggests it's highly likely. What happens when you wake up? Are you like going to come into a world where you don't know what's happening at all? You like just re-enter a completely new world and you expect people to integrate and be happy within that. All analysis never given by PM. We think that's problematic because we think that that means that individuals aren't consenting to any choice that they can reasonably like consent to. Okay, so first, like main rebuttal, right? The idea of happiness. Our responses are simple. One, we think happiness isn't everything in society. For example, we don't allow you to take drugs even if that makes you happy. No thanks, because we think that you owe duties to others, because we think that your happiness can be short-lived and there are bigger things at play that maybe make you happier in the long term, rather than taking the short-term happiness of getting away from a particular period of hard times. That is why we think happiness isn't everything that it stands for. It's not a principle that can ever be absolute. But second, no thank you, we think happiness is extraordinarily speculative, right? Because it's very questionable as to why you will be happier in 20 years. If you're sad because you're depressed, I suggest that if you come back now 10 years or 20 years, your depression stays and the kind of mental things that eat away at you and your insecurities are likely to stay. But above and beyond that, we think that we think weighed up against the definite harm that we talk about of like making an irrational choice and not being able to do anything within this particular amount of time, we think that this choice is a bad choice we need to protect individuals from. First, constructive. Why do we think we protect individuals? But before that, yeah.
Don't misrepresent our case. Even if we might not be able to find happiness in the future. If someone now decides that this world will never give them the fulfillment they deserve, would you force them to live that life?
Yes, that's my side of the motion, duh. But second, above and beyond that, I think insofar as it's speculative that you can attain a particular benefit, then we should jolly well avoid the harms that come with freezing yourself. That's why we oppose. Okay, why do we think we protect the individual? 3 principal reasons. 1, we think your choice is fundamentally irrational. Why? Because we think that the idea of death or the idea of freezing yourself is extraordinarily significant and scary. And this is a choice, and this is a decision that you cannot rationally weigh up because it's so huge. You cannot weigh up the cost-benefit analysis for the overwhelming majority of people. The point is, we aim to minimize irrational decision-making because we think that there is a significant potential hurt to self that you accrue at the point that you make a decision when you're irrational. That is why, for example, we don't allow you to make decisions under duress because we think that the decision you make may not truly be what you want and you might regret this decision in the long term. We think that this duress in this scenario is a long-term kind of duress, and therefore we don't think that this is sufficient for us to prove or believe justifiably they are rational enough to make a decision. Second, we think that this choice is fundamentally uninformed. Here's the thing. They try to shrug this off by saying you never know what happens when you make a decision. Here's the thing, right? In this, you don't know what's going to happen during this period of time for you when you're being frozen or for everybody else who you care about in society. You don't know what your life is going to look like when you come back. The point of this is that you cannot rationally understand the significance of making such a choice because you don't know what it's like, because no one can project into the future and tell you what it's going to be like. And therefore, we think that your choice is systemically uninformed. Therefore, it's a choice we cannot allow you to make. That is why, for example, we don't allow people to go for clinical testing of drugs that we don't know for reasonably certain what's going to happen because we think that this is an irrational risk, uninformed risk that you cannot reasonably consent to. 3, we think that your choice is fundamentally irreversible. Look, let's just preempt the response. All choices are irreversible. No, normally most decisions we can make are things that can be mitigatable. For example, if I pick a school and I don't like it, I can jolly well go and change school. The problem is that at the point that you freeze yourself, you don't have the mental capability to respond because your mouth is frozen, and therefore you don't have the ability to ever reverse this decision for the period of time that you are frozen. That is everything that is problematic because it means that you can never go back and undo a choice that you regret. That is why, for example, we won't let you sell yourself into slavery, or we won't let you commit suicide because we think that in the future you should have the ability to reverse a choice that you don't like. And here's the thing, we think that even if they're in the best case scenario, people rationally decide they want to kill themselves, I think the government has an obligation to protect you against a bad choice, especially vulnerable individuals against others. Why? 1, because they have no meaningful consent. It's more important for you to not opt into something that is harmful. You all can sit down and against just living your life in the status quo because you lack an active choice to take down these harms. But second, because you think that at the point that you stay alive, you have maximum ability to act, to change the circumstances and put yourself in a better life. It's unclear as to why there's no ability for you to get happiness on their side of the house. Second, we think your choice is necessarily bad. We need to understand that at the point that you exit, you have no clue what happened when you re-enter, you have no idea what happened when you re-enter society. We think that society moves significantly, not just in terms of material things that you cannot understand and know how to use, but also because the fabric of society changes. In terms of how people interact, people's lingo, for example, because your culture of the society is fundamentally different. Because there's no common topic to connect with people because you were away for the last 20 odd years. That means we think that you're isolated in society and there's a disjunct between you and everybody else as an individual. We think that this basic need of companionship is therefore very, very hard to achieve on your side of the house. Because of this, we think that your choice is necessarily a bad one, and we think we should stop people from making choices that are going to be harmful to themselves. Second, let's talk about the idea of why we think it's a societal duty to not allow this. No thanks. We have 2 reasons. The first is that we think that insofar as recognized that you cannot re-enter society, or when you re-enter society, you have this jump between you and everybody else, then the need to reintegrate, we think, makes you a burden. Because we think that, for one thing, the economy, etc., has moved on and you're not able to contribute to it. That means at the point that you re-enter society, you're likely to have difficulty reintegrating the economy. You're likely to be a burden or at best not contributing to society, as you could be if we didn't allow you to go and freeze yourself. Second, we think that there's a risk of things like ghettoization at a point that you cannot relate with a lot of society and you become a separate disjunct society. But second, we think that more often than not, society is going to need people. Now, understand that on their side, most people are going to do this in times like economic recession, for example. These are times when we most need people to help us instead of going away and getting frozen just to avoid the short-term harm. We think that therefore on their side, they're going to hurt majorities and they're going to hurt society at the point that they let people run away because they don't feel like being here. Why is society important? Because we think that 1, the government has a duty to all individuals in society. Insofar as your choice hurts a lot of other people because you're no longer economically useful, or because we think society, or because like we don't have the ability to for you to contribute, then we think the choice becomes one, harmful, and two, becomes coercive. Because if a lot of people join this particular choice, even people who didn't want to do this are forced into this because they have no ability for them to succeed in the status quo. But second, we think individuals have duties to others because society helps you in many ways, like giving you certain resources. And therefore, we think you have an obligation to return and help society. You cannot run away from society's problems. That is why we think that their side is harmful for individuals, harmful for societies, and that's why we are very happy to oppose.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition. We now recognize the Deputy Prime Minister.
From the beginning, this debate was never about the possibility of success. It was never about the specifics, your ability for your brain to degenerate or for your ability to process pain within the process. Because these are all things that exist within daily choices that people make. You might go through surgery, the point at which the painkillers wear off. Within that process, some people might feel pain. But that's a rational choice a person made with the most amount of information possible. So we think out of the variety of attacks that side opposition had in this debate, a large portion of them was immaterial. If you could process pain, if you could feel suffering, if these were things that could potentially make you a person of less utility in the future, they would also be against things like harmful procedures. They would also be against things like medical decisions that could affect you as a person and your utility to society. I don't think anyone has that obligation. I'm going to ask two questions in this speech. Firstly, is this a reasonable choice? And secondly, does anyone have an obligation to the movements in society and the progression of society? But before that, one point of rebuttal. Because a lot of their claims were people at the pain of freezing. You know, there's a lot of possibilities that are infinite. So if you want the specifics, I think similar to any other medical procedure, we have painkillers, we have anesthesia to limit your ability to feel that pain. But secondly, the point at which we freeze your brain, in essence, because the body is just a construct that is being used by your brain, we think all metabolic reactions would also stop. Your heart would stop beating, your ability to process pain would stop beating, your ability to feel all these harms would also stop. So even if someone felt pain during the pre-part of that process, we don't think they'd be feeling pain through this process, if that's what opposition wanted this debate to be about. So firstly, is this a reasonable choice? There are 5 levels of analysis to this. Happiness isn't everything. Well, it should be. We shouldn't debate this world, we shouldn't debate this debate in a world that exists, but it should happen in a world that should exist. Also, recognize a lot of the examples of side opposition are completely selective. Drugs are legal in certain areas, they are not legal in other areas, and your side would have to defend certain objective harms not existing. But secondly, we don't have to prove that all objective harms that happen need to be legislated, because we think that's unreasonable. But certain objective harms that exist are still made by people in society. Euthanasia, the ability to go to placebo effect, and treatment that could prolong your life but not cure you instantly. Even if happiness wasn't everything, side of government is going to take a stand to make it everything. And we think that that should be the measure of quality of life of a person, but not the longevity of your life as an individual. Secondly, happiness is speculative. I agree, but a majority of the decisions that people make in life are also speculative. I buy clothes because people tell me they are nice. Not everyone could think the same opinion, but the speculation that you make could be of your own reasoning or other reasonings, similar to all other decisions within society. But their delineation was the 3rd level of analysis, is that it's a harmful and irreversible decision that people shouldn't be barred from making. I think there's a line. There might be harmful decisions that people could go through extreme regret making. For example, an abortion. For example, going through transplants that could potentially affect your health as an individual. People aren't able to ascertain their happiness in the future, but they're able to ascertain the sadness right now. And those should be the criteria for making a reasonable choice. At that point in time, before making that decision, if you're the most informed individual, regardless of the consequences, i.e. not liking your decision in the future, feeling regret for carrying a harmful decision, we think people should have that ability. So government has the onus of proving that people have the most amount of information. So next, are individuals truly uninformed? So their claim was that people don't have the ability to envision the future. People don't have the ability ability to wake up in the future and necessarily integrate into society, or even just realize the consequences of their actions. So in our policy, we told you we'd flood the media with as much truthful information as possible. We'll tell you it's not necessarily beneficial. We'll tell you the high costs that it could undertake. We'll tell you your ability to not start from scratch at that point. So secondly, we told you we enforce structures to allow people to benefit when they are resurrected or they are thorn. You have the ability to cash in money that could be accessed in the future, the point at which you come out of that decision. People have the ability to decide their future at that given point in time. Sure.
If happiness is everything, and then it's important to keep people happy at the expense of others, would you allow rich people to not pay tax and abolish the welfare system?
So there's a link, right? When you're making a decision that benefits your own happiness at that point in time, and we can see no material harm to other individuals in society, we would legislate that choice. But all their harms recognized are just emotional harms that people face. Your ability to harm someone else by making that decision could possibly hurt their feelings as a person. Abstract harms that we cannot ascertain, similar to euthanasia, similar to taking procedures that could possibly harm yourself. All those decisions could affect the emotions of other people and make other people feel sad. It could reduce the ability for another person to function under certain periods in time. But these are all abstract harms that we think we shouldn't process. We should process the material happiness that a person has. But secondly, happiness is usually not uniform. It's usually ascertainable in certain ways. While sadness can dematerialize in other ways. So under your paradigm, when this person has objectively decided that I'm no longer going to be happy in this world, he will set his mindset to not living a happy life under your paradigm. But if other people are sad by the demise of a certain person, we think people have the ability to recover, if not more than an individual who has the ability to suffer from this harm. The last level of analysis here is that will people be able to integrate? So the reason why we told you people are able to make this decision reasonably is a lot of constructs in society exist that bar the ability to gain happiness. So it might be true in 20 years, a lot of these structural problems still exist. It might be true that you might be unemployed. It might be true that your ability to be respected in a community of your choosing is not guaranteed under our paradigm. But these are all reasonable considerations that people can make at that point in time. You can also reasonably assess when you want to be cryogenically defrosted. If you think by that point in time, a lot of these harms would not exist. If you think by that time, social standards would not exist. But if they still do exist, it's still a rational choice. Second question, does anyone have an obligation to people in society? I think this is just horrible. This side of the house wants to solve recessions by just making people live sad lives throughout that recession, making people hate themselves, not being able to feed their children, send their children to an education. But even if the argument was utility, we think people who have made these decisions also would likely protect themselves in contrast to be beneficial. So the individuals that will cryogenically freeze themselves might let their money sit in a time of recession. They might not contribute to the economy, it's unascertainable, but the point at which they wanted to opt out of this lifestyle, that's a rational calculus. We don't think they will contribute to the beneficiary. But secondly, we don't think that anyone has any obligation. States allow people to move neighborhoods. We don't force you to solve problems within neighborhoods. States allow people to racially alter their appearance if you think being African American or looking African American could affect your reputation as a person. These are all decisions that limit the ability for someone to be beneficial or to have utility within a specific issue. But if you have an obligation to yourself, before your country, before your community, before your neighborhood, people should be happy. Utility might decrease in the worst circumstance. But for this person, he lived the happiest life that he could have possibly had.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. We now welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
We understand that happiness is somewhat important to people, but when your own happiness and your ability to exercise that happiness infringes on other people's ability to be happy, we think that's problematic. And that's the argument that they considered in their DPM in the POI, right? They said that you won't allow people to infringe on other people's rights. But insofar as you allow people to freeze their bodies, we argue that there's like harmful societal impact, something they never once tried to deal with. But let's not let them trivialize like this debate with like examples that are irrelevant, right? Because the fundamental difference between freezing your body and like other harmful procedures like going through a risky operation is this, right? When I go through a risky operation, I know that perhaps there's a 70% benefit, 70% risk of me dying. So at least I know the outcome. I know like tangibly the risk. The difference is this, right? When I freeze my body, I don't know how the world will look like 20 years later. I don't know what will happen to my possessions. I don't know what will happen to society, and I don't know if I can integrate into that society. This is the big difference, which is why we don't allow individuals to make choices that are irreversible and like choices that they cannot like tangibly measure, right? So this is the difference. We don't let them misrepresent us. But I'm going to examine two things, right? First, I'll talk about self-fulfillment, why happiness perhaps isn't everything, and secondly, I'll examine the impact on society, something they never really tried to deal with. First, on self-fulfillment, right? The only argument coming from their side is that being happy is important. We think, okay, we accept being happy is important. But number one, the problem is that they assume that when people are in like states of unhappiness, they assume that you won't ever be happy again, right? We recognize that there are ways for you to get out of the unhappiness, and making this irreversible choice, no thank you, on the assumption that you won't ever be happy again is problematic, especially because when you're in that frame of mind of severe unhappiness, you won't think of whether you can be happy again. That's the problem, right? But more importantly, we told you about the speculative benefit, and this was important that they need to deal with, right? Because the speculative benefit was this, right? That you speculate that you will be happier and you will be a happier person when you wake up. This is not necessarily true. We give you the example of how, say, if you're depressed now, right, that you like freeze yourself and your mental stage like remains the same, it won't necessarily improve. So when you wake up, you'll be like depressed again. We don't see how there's a net benefit. They've never proven to us how there's a like guaranteed benefit. But more importantly, we tell you it's not absolute, right? That being happy is not absolute insofar as there are like harms to like you being happy. But more importantly, they try to tell us that your like present self is always more important than your future self. We reject this characterization. We tell you that ultimately, as individuals in society, we always prepare for our future selves, which is why like governments put in like welfare schemes and like ensure that people have savings in order to ensure like they have like a very sustainable life. But more importantly, Mael gave you important analysis that they never once tried to deal with, right? What did he tell you? Number one, he told you how it was an irrational and uninformed choice. Why? When you're in the circumstance, when you're in so much pain and so much unhappiness, no thank you. This like solution of freezing your body will seem as a panacea, right? Similar to like suicide, when you can avoid all problems, when you can push all problems aside and say, deal with them later. No thank you. They never told us how this will necessarily be an informed choice, right? We think that just because you give information doesn't necessarily change like the decision-making calculus of those people, because they recognize that if this is a solution that can get rid of all their problems, we think they're willing to take it. They've never once dealt with. Secondly, he told you about how it's an irreversible choice, right? Because you never know what will happen when you come back into society. There's a questionable doubt about what will happen in future in the society. We think this is especially important because we prevent people from making choices that are irreversible. The difference between other choices in society, no thank you, is that like say if choices I make can be mitigated, right? When I choose to freeze my body, I cannot stop myself or get out of that freezing in the 10 years time, right? Say halfway through, I cannot stop myself. But more importantly, we give you the comparative, right? Say if you're really in like a huge like state of unhappiness, how do we like help you better? We tell you that at least, right, at the very least, you are living, you're able to solve your problems, you're able to deal with the problems, and you can try your best to maximize the happiness, right? This is why I give you important like extension material about how this is the meaning of life, right? That ultimately the meaning of life is to deal and grapple with problems. This is what makes us so unique as individuals when we're able to have the agency of our own lives and solve our own problems. We tell you that shutting away, no thank you, your problems is not like the true meaning of, it does not make you a human being. But second, right, I'd like to talk to you about the impact on society, right? This is where we tell you that they made an important concession, no thank you, in like when we POI'd them, right? Because they told us about how they considered that it's not okay for you like to infringe on other people's right to happiness. Insofar as we can prove the link between my own happiness and how I like use my own happiness and how this infringes on other people's happiness, we think we take this debate. Before that, yes.
If material harms can happen, they can reduce another person's ability to access happiness, i.e. killing a person, incapacitating a person. Those are things that we would be against. But under your paradigm, these are abstract harms that you can quell.
Sir, I'll make it less abstract now. I'll tell you how it's a coercive choice. It's a coercive choice because we give you and we suggest a scenario where like people would most likely freeze their bodies, right? We think people will freeze their bodies like most likely in a scenario of extreme hardship, say extreme financial hardship in economic recessions. In these situations, what happens is this, right? Individuals who freeze their body stop contributing to society, stop being a member of society, and stop like contributing to society. What happens is when you have less people contributing to society, it just worsens the situation where like there's less like economic productivity activity and less economic contributions, right? Insofar as that happens, you worsen the economic hardship. No, thank you. You worsen the hardship on their side. You force the people who are undergoing that hardship to face worse lives, and we tell you this is coercive choice, right? Because you force other individuals into making the choice of freezing their bodies as well when they're placed in so much unhappiness, and using an analysis about how it will be a solution to all their problems and how people have the right to be happy. We think you make other individuals even more unhappy. But more importantly, they dropped important analysis about how there's they told us about how euthanasia and other cases causes emotional harm to people. Number one, we tell you is fundamentally different, but more importantly, we're willing to ban euthanasia as well if that's the case. But more importantly, this was important characterization about how there's a huge impact on these individuals when they exist in society after they get refrozen, right? This was important, and we felt it was problematic they didn't deal with it, right? Because every policy that comes and every solution that you propose, you need to take into account what will happen after you re-enter society, right? This is an analysis we're going to bring to you again, right? Say you freeze your body for a considerable amount of time, say 20 years, everything will change in the society. The values in the society will change. You'll walk down the streets, you walk down pavilion and you see different billboards, you see different brands, and you see people who you cannot talk to because society has changed so much. Why is it so problematic? Right? It's problematic when you're isolated in society. If you're telling us about people who are unhappy, the easiest way for these people to regain happiness is to have societal structures. When you come back to society and all your family members are dead, all your friends are dead, we don't see how you can have societal structures and societal support that's so integral in making you happy, right? Insofar as the outcome on their side is to make people happier, we don't see how that happens when you're isolated, when you're ghettoized. Because I proved to you how, number one, that this choice is never real and never informed, and secondly, there are large impacts in society that we're not willing to take. I'm extremely proud to oppose.
Thank you, Deputy Leader Park. To conclude the substantive portion of government's case, welcome the government witness.
The inhumanity of forcing someone to live in a perpetuating cycle of evil is unacceptable. We will not deny individuals the personalization of happiness. We will not impose standards that cause you to make your life meaningless to you. We think that every person in this world is born different. And it's not about making sure we live a uniform life. It's about making sure we cater to all those unique differences that make us human. If I want to opt into facial reconstruction surgery, that is legitimate. If I want to kill myself, that's legitimate. Because the individual who knows most about themselves is not the state, but the person himself who may be suffering that we do not know about. So in my whip speech, I want to ask a number of questions to deal with team opposition. One, are people making a rational decision? Because here's a silver bullet from opposition. It's a coercive choice. Well, here's what we'll say. We think that every decision that can ever be made in this society is a coercive choice. We think the media crowds out what means to be unique to by imposing objective standards that you should follow. We think money is also an objective benefit that people try their best to opt into, not because it's what they want, because the society you live in coerces them to believe that that's a benefit that they need. Here's why we are fine with coerciveness. Because if society has already constructed happiness, love, and pain, we think that coerciveness may be the way you can find happiness. The point in which you opted into that coerciveness and you still accrue happiness from that, you do believe that maybe the objective beauty standards are important, you do believe that maybe money is important, that means that you have personalized that coerciveness and turned it into something that's good for yourself. So regardless of whether it's coercive, we think the point at which you believe it's a good thing for yourself, it's a good thing that you should be able to access. No, thank you. But two, we think that if you accrue a lot of happiness to it, it's fine. Because a victim of your society's coercion cannot manifest happiness that you deny. But the second thing was let's say, is that we think that they were largely unresponsive because we told you we can mitigate coercion through our mechanism. If anything, if your biggest harm is that people are going to be uninformed, then our alternative is going to be that we'll make sure they're as informed as possible. And this is the most that we can do to any decision, because there are reasonable harms that can be accrued to facial reconstruction surgery, and there are reasonable harms that can be accrued through abortion. The decision that is to make sure that no one is subject to any risk of harm is to make sure that they know what they're going to be opting into. But secondly, on this issue, what about if it's irreversible? No, thank you. We think people can have children. People can invest in stock markets. Here's the distinction. We think that for irreversible decisions that will be made anyways, the individual should be able to rationalize what's going to happen to them. But even if, we think it's more preferable if the individuals make these irreversible decisions, not your states. Because an irreversible decision would be to continue living their lives at the end of terms in an already horrible world. So you're still going to make sure that they live in a society that they cannot opt out of. So that's an irreversible decision that you're going to be imposing onto them, and they won't be happy with anyways. No, thank you. But what if they cannot put themselves in a position of happiness? Wow, that's wonderful, because the world currently is so happy, because there are no black people who live on welfare, because there are no children who are orphans. The world is a shit place that people don't want to live in. And as long as we can opt out of that world, we think it's a benefit for them if they really believe that it's awful. But their logic was that culture will eventually change in accordance to time, and then maybe you can feel happy in the future. So if in the future the culture changes to be one that's beneficial, why won't they feel the same happiness then? No, thank you. But even if they can't, we think that if this is what the people wanted, it's what they should get. So whatever, it might not be the best thing in the future, but they knew that this could be a harm that they were going to opt into. Before that, yes.
People will not be allowed to not pay tax because it's important for their happiness to come together with other people's happiness. We give you extensive analysis to why this particular mechanism hurts other people's happiness at one junction. Why then is this happiness still legitimate?
We think principally you should not have to pay for tax because that's something that you don't want. But we understand that there are some harms we cannot mitigate onto the public. Here's the distinction. We think that you suffering currently in this world and that suffering being caused by other people is in no way going to affect the bigots that cause you to live into these social circumstances, because you are the individual opting out of their oppression, not the other way around. So the second thing, will you find happiness in the future? We think that people currently are unable to contribute to that culture if they're sad. So this debate focuses on the people who want to opt out simply because currently they were unable to conceive the happiness in other ways. When these are individuals who are depressed and unhappy, we don't think they'd be the individuals who are the most important fighters of that fight because they're simply the least empowered. They'd rather opt out of that life and conform to whatever like depression that's happening now, simply because they want to minimize the amount of pain that can be accrued by loss. So in your world, you will prevent a maximization of happiness, the point at which the alternative is to conform to that suffering, not opt into a life that could give them more benefits. No, thank you. But even if we think no one is a social battering ram, the people that are sad are victims, and we think the victims should be the individuals that change the structures. You should change the bullies themselves. But in your best case scenario, we think that if people do fight, these are the people that will die with a sense of guilt, because the fight is one that's structural, and it goes on for a long amount of years. It goes on for years that we can't even ascertain how long it'll be. The individuals that will never see that change happening will be the people who will not live a fulfilled life and know that they could have lived doing something else. They could have seen more happiness, but they were denied that because of our governments. No, thank you. What about being a burden, right? We think we would rather maybe be a burden to others as long as we don't internalize the harms to ourselves. So sure, other people might not like us, but this is about our individual conceptualization of life. If we go to the future and we see more benefits, we think the way we conceive and personalize that happiness is important, because at least we don't internalize all the pain and suffering that will deny any form of happiness we could possibly accrue. But the third issue, on is happiness the be-all and end-all? The first thing they do is, what if it brings harm to yourself? We think yes, that's still happiness. And here's why we're fine with suicide. Because suicide is completely legitimate, the point at which you want to kill yourself and you don't think life is happy anymore. We think everyone should be able to have as much access as possible to opting out of the world. And here's why. In your world, there will be victims who can never escape. There will always be the black minority, there will always be the poor, there will always be the individuals who are simply not privileged, and they cannot opt out of such irreversible structures anyways. So harming themselves is much more preferable than other people harming them. because we think they have less agency over those forms of oppressions. But what about people wanting to fight? We think people who would have opted out are those who are unhappy, not the empowered who are rich and privileged. So in your world, the individuals who would stay will be the individuals that are most likely to be able to make any change, because we don't see why Donald Trump want to opt out of world where he already monopolizes all the resources and happiness that you could accrue. If anything, the most important members of the fight stay in your world. But two, we already said that if the least important members stay, it's even worse off. But here's where we bite the bullet. If other people suffer, we are fine with that. And here's the key distinction. Society is an evil place that's complicit in the perpetuation of harm to the most amount of people. Let your society suffer. Let the individuals who oppress you die and live horrible lives, the point at which you leave, and you can now turn the oppression against them. Because we think in no way do you owe any form of reparation to the individuals that took away your family's life. If anything, if you want to give these people justice, take away the right to happiness to the individuals who took it away from them. Make them the victims and make them realize why they were wrong, make them realize why there is a future we should work for, and we are the people who deny that.
All right, thank you, Government Whip. To conclude the substantive portion of this debate, I welcome the audience.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to ask two questions. First, is this choice legitimate? Second, is this choice actually a good one? One, is this choice legitimate? We started with a very simple question. What are the standards by which we decide whether some choices are legitimate and others are not? In LO, we give you three clear metrics. One, this choice in particular is irrational. Why? What are the circumstances? Let's co-opt the kind of analysis. Say you're desperate. Say you desperately want to see your grandchild in the future. Let's say you desperately want to get rid of this mental illness. Let's say you desperately want to find a job in the future and get rid of this economic recession. It is in these situations, in these circumstances, that you are most irrational. This is why we systemically proven that the circumstances under which people make these choices, taking their own language and their own examples, will be systemically irrational. No clear response from their side. Two, we told this choice is actually uninformed. Here's the thing, right? You cannot epistemically determine what the future will look like in the future, because obviously no one can tell what the future is. That is why we tell you the kind of benefit we are looking at is extremely speculative. And this is very different from what they say, right? Operation, something that was dropped in the third speaker, by the way. Why? Why do you allow individuals to look at operations? Because you can access the risk through things such as science, but we cannot assess what the future will look like because society is changing at such a fast rate. So, insofar as you don't allow individuals to opt to a contract whereby the outcome is very, very uncertain, we won't allow individuals to make this choice either. Three, we told you that this choice is extremely irreversible. In the same way you don't allow individuals to sell yourself into slavery, we suggest that these kinds of impacts and these kinds of consequences are hugely irreversible and cannot be mitigated. Analysis dropped by these guys. Fourth reason, we told you that this choice is coercive. So, what do you mean by coercive, right? Say for instance you're in an economic recession. One guy decides that it's better off living in the future when this economic recession is gone. Insofar as so many people make this choice as well, this means the economy goes to shambles. And this means it's coercive choice because other people left in this shit economy also make this choice. Their response, all choices are coercive. But this is very different. This example was things like, you're forced to buy things in the media. But there's very different, there's a different opportunity cost between me buying something I don't really need because of the media, vis-a-vis things like the psychological trauma that will happen because I don't know what will happen when I wake up after 20, 30 years of being frozen in this chamber or whatever. So this is why the harms are so different, and this is why this idea, this very generic rebuttal that all choices are coercive doesn't really make sense. Then they say, you got your policy, you throw things in the media. But how can the media actually tell me, no thank you, then how can the media actually tell me what the future will exactly look like in any circumstance? We don't see how this is actually ever possible. Here's the thing, right? We've proven to you that for these reasons, the circumstances under which these individuals make these choices means that all of these four criteria cannot be fulfilled. But here's the thing, right? In GovRip, they say we'd rather make individuals choose these decisions. No, why? Because actually, as we told you, people don't actually know what makes them happy. Because in many circumstances, especially this circumstance, when they choose what makes them happy, they are often irrational, and they are often uninformed, and these choices are often irrational. So don't let them get away with this lie that individuals individuals always know what makes them happy to begin with. But the rallying call coming from these guys was that happiness is everything, you know, like screw all these three conditions. The state must allow individuals to make their own happiness and things like that. This was the line of logic that these guys wanted. No, we disagree. We suggest that you owe duties to other people in the society. Why? One, and this is coming from LO, because many people helped you before. Because the reason why you can exist in this society is, for instance, because someone paid tax to build the road you are talking about, you are like traveling on, build the school that you're attending. So people helped you before, and you owe reciprocal duties to society. And this is from LO that these guys never responded to. But second, we suggest that the state imposes duties on everyone. Why? Because happiness of individuals is inherently contradictory. Here is where the contradiction that POI was extremely alarming. They said that they were happy to impose a tax system. Here's the thing, right? If rich man's conception of happiness is not to pay tax, this is directly contradictory to a poor man's conception of happiness, whereby he has things like a welfare system and a subsidized healthcare system. So no, it's not the case that the state must allow every individual to access happiness in any single way. So this is why, secondly, we told you that this kind of happiness you're talking about is extremely speculative. Maybe it's going to turn out well. Maybe it's going to turn out badly. But what happens to the most vulnerable? The depressed person who chooses this like in a very irrational circumstance. What happens to these vulnerable people? We think that the state owes special duties, and this comes from LO that these guys haven't responded to, special duties to the most vulnerable people in society. So what happens to the most vulnerable, whereby these choices may not be good in the first place? We think the state must prioritize these vulnerable people to begin with. But above and beyond that, this idea of happiness is everything. This entire rhetoric about how people must find their sense of happiness is completely false. Because as we told you, that people do not know what makes them happy, given that many of these the circumstances under which they make these choices means that they often cannot epistemically determine what makes them happy in the future. But the comparative we told you is that we're very happy for people to live their normal lives, right? Their continuous lives. Why? Because we suggest you can still find means to access your happiness. You can make other decisions in life, like go get a job or like find like other people to talk to. All of these is lost on their side insofar as you're frozen in a chamber in a block of ice forever. This is why, moving to my second question, I'll tell you why the choice is actually not a very good one. No, thank you. We questioned, first thing we asked, right, on my second question. First thing we asked, what happens when we wake up? And this is where we think the failure to characterize what happens when we wake up was extremely damaging. Let me paint you a picture of what happens when we wake up. You wake up, you go to the street, but who are you going to talk to? All these people who have memories and like experiences in the past 20, 30 years that you cannot ever connect to. This is why we told you that this is why the kinds of experience and kind of policy is extremely akin to like people who like wake up after 10, 15 years in coma, or people who are released from prison cells after 50, 60 years. Can they integrate? No. Many of them face terrible problems in the status quo. This is something, no thank you, and this is why we told you that the happiness is extremely speculative. And given that this happiness is so speculative, but we told you the harms are so great, we wouldn't allow individuals to make this choice. Because the extent of this harm is massive. What are these harms? One, societal isolation. You can only talk to this small group of people who have experienced the same kind of experience. We don't think that's good. Secondly, you have no societal support structures whatsoever. Say if you're the most vulnerable people, if you have depression, who are you going to talk to? You don't have people to speak to because there are many experiences in the past 20, 30 years that you cannot talk to a counselor or anyone in society to. We think that's terrible. Three, we suggest that social interaction is extremely important. Why? Because it's through societal interaction that often ascertain things like happiness. So, given that these kinds of circumstances, these kinds of harms are so massive, what happens when we wake up, the consequences of what happens when we wake up are so massive. We don't think that these guys have characterized this at all. Given this, we don't think people actually consider this to begin with because they're so desperate. And that's why we didn't allow individuals to make this choice. But above and beyond that, we question what kinds of circumstances under which people will make this choice. We suggest that copying the policy, that is a very convenient choice, right? Because they're happy to provide things like subsidies. So, if you're a person who's lost all his money, all his fortune in a recession, we suggest it's pretty easy for you to opt into this choice to begin with. Why? Because but we told you that you have obligations to other people not to do this. Govwhip says, but what if you're a minority? Here's the thing, if you're a minority, if you're a black person, you opt out of this. What happens to everyone else who doesn't opt into this? We think you would abandon all your duties to other minorities in society. We think that's terrible. These guys leave the most vulnerable people even more vulnerable in the future. These guys have not characterized what happens when you wake up, and these guys support a choice that's illegitimate and systemically irrational. For these reasons, we proudly oppose.
Sri Permata started at PM by telling us that happiness is everything. At the end of 3 speeches, they were still saying happiness is everything. That's all their case boils down to. And insofar as I think they spent 3 speeches trying to break that down, we're very happy to progress to finals. First question as to whether happiness is everything. Is happiness really the be all and end all? Here's what we told you, right? We told you, number one, that we didn't think that happiness was everything under the current status quo. That's why, for example, we made you pay tax even though that probably was going to go against your particular conception of what happiness was because you lose money. We think that that's important. And this is something that Deputy considered, by the way. He says, we will only, you can only have, actually, happiness not everything. It's only happiness insofar as you don't hurt another individual's happiness. Okay, here's why we think you hurt other people's happiness. Because in the current, short term, right, your lack of contribution hurts other people's happiness. The fact that you jump ship and don't help the economy in the status quo means that every other individual around you is going to be less happy because they lose out on the economic contribution that you give. With the fact that you come back into the future, you're likely to be a burden, and analysis I gave you a leader opposition never dealt with hurts people in the future. So we think that there's massive harm to society that exists here. So why then do we think that you have a duty to other people in society? One, because governments have a duty to people other than you. That means that they need to protect people other than you and the happiness of people other than you. That probably includes making sure that they're able to have people to contribute to a better world with you in it. But second, we said there's individual to individual duties. Like on the car, the road that you drive on the way to being frozen was paid for by society as a whole, and therefore we think you have a duty to that particular society. That's why we think that they cannot strike away the duties that people owe to other people in society. Insofar as that, then this choice is illegitimate because it hurts other individuals. But second, right, the question is, will you really be happy? This is important because insofar as you spend a lot of time proving that it's unclear as to whether you'll be happy, then the benefit that they offer to individuals is genuinely uncertain. So what did they tell you, right? The first 2 speakers said that the problem was just a general problem of sadness and depression. We said if you have depression, not clear why in the future you wouldn't still be sad or you wouldn't have depression. Then Whip changes this. Whip says actually it's about a poor black guy who's being racially discriminated. But the question is still the same. Why is it in the future you're going to lead a better life? Insofar as they cannot prove this, the benefit they suggest is speculative and marginal. Vis-a-vis the definite harms that we tell you. Like we told you that chances are in the future you're going to have no friends like Kieran. You're going to be in a position where you don't have people to rely on as a support structure. You're going to be in a position where if you're depressed, if you're a minority, you are all alone. And the thing is, you've already hurt the other members of the minority, as Kieran told you, by not being there to help them. That reduces the amount of societal progress that you can actually achieve for you to be happy in the future. Insofar as that, then I think that the happiness that they're able to suggest is minimal because you don't know what the future is like, you have no friends in the future, you lack the support structures to make you happy. But above and beyond that, I'm further going to suggest that insofar as this benefit is unclear, I suggest that forcing people to stay around can bring benefit in many, many other ways. Like the fact that you never know for sure that you cannot ascertain, that you cannot find the source of happiness in the short run. That means that we think that we are still able to stand for people being happy. But finally, right, even if it's true that you're going to be happy in the future, do you really know what you want in the short term? That was the question I posed all the way in my speech. We said the problem was that these choices were more often than not irrational and uninformed, and the problem was that they were irreversible. So I suppose there's a bit of, we've told you extensive analysis of why you can never know what the future is like, why we think why we think there's an immediacy bias that means you're likely to take this choice unfairly. But even if this is a deadlock, here's the thing. We think that we rather err on the side of caution because I told you in my speech why it was more important to protect the vulnerable people who wouldn't otherwise consent to this, who, due to the circumstances, are forced into a decision to forsake 20 years of their current life, which they wouldn't otherwise have done. These are the people we need to protect, and so we think because we protect the vulnerable, and more importantly, we protect everybody else in society who we think you owe obligations to, we're very happy to stand in awe.
I really hope by the end of this speech, I'm able to prove to you why opposition's examples were selective, why they strawman our distinction in terms of harms, and from the responses we make, break the deadlocks that happen. Because I saw 2 issues in this debate. Firstly, is this a rational choice? And secondly, do people have an obligation in society? I'll take side opposition's metrics and I'll prove to you why we broke them as well. Because they say people are desperate, and the variety of choices that you have, or the limitation of choices that you have, make you a desperate person that reduces your ability to be rational. I don't think so. I think people make decisions when they're desperate all the time. When you're suffering in a job and you think there is no end to your life, you might get a promotion in the future, you might get a bonus in the future, but that time of desperation allows you to make a choice at that point to decide your path as a person. So desperation should not be a metric for limiting a person's choice or invalidating a person's choice. But they told us that these people are informed, and they told us that the reasoning behind this is that we can never see the future, and their delineation with statistics help you know when a medical procedure is going to fail you or not. This is where it was selective. There are a variety of things in the future that we can choose opt into that might not have indefinite consequences. From the Prime Minister, we told you, people can go rock climbing, people can work in mines, people can take dangerous jobs, even if all these things don't have statistics, even if you could come up with a broken limb or possibly have a lesser life in the future. It is not uninformed, and statistics aren't the be-all end-all of a legitimate choice. People should be able to make that rational calculus even if they don't have concrete facts and numbers to base it on. Thirdly, they told you it's coercive because other people making this choice forces you to make this choice as well. I can name you a lot of things that has the same line of logic, right? In the pursuit of wealth, everyone wants to buy a car. In the pursuit of wealth, everyone wants to be rich, and by virtue of that, you have so many social structures that force people into the same pursuit of happiness that links it to wealth. Similar to your opting out recession, people suffering as a result of it, we think there are other choices in society that coerce people by the media standards that exist, and people just make these choices. We don't think that they're invalid. And this is where we think that side opposition lost debate, because their comparative is that people can be happy in the future. Their end-all comparative is that if you don't make this choice, you're probably skipping out a decision that you could have probably regretted in the future. They said there's counseling for people who are depressed. There's abilities to seek help. But if someone has made the decision that they don't want to live in this world, they won't reach your counseling. If someone has made a decision that they don't think their life's worth living because they're so sad and depressed, I don't think that they're going to live a happy life. If not, the period of time of reaching that happy life is something that people cannot opt out of. And forcing people to bind themselves to this earth is a coercive choice and an irreversible choice that we don't think side opposition wanted to acknowledge. Why is opting out such a coercive choice, but being forced in such a legitimate choice that you, a person, was born into? But they told us we don't know what you'll wake up into, right? Their comparison was prison. You're forced into jail. When you come out, you can't integrate people in society. I think culture changes. People can make reasonings. Even in its worst form, if you can talk to a selective group of people, at the point at which you made the decision to freeze yourself, you had some semblance of understanding that you could have only talked to that selective group of people. But lastly, we think that within this, people might make decisions that they regret. But similar to every other irreversible decision, this should fall within that line. But secondly, do people have an obligation? The silver bullet of side opposition is that people have always helped you before, and by virtue of people helping you before, you should do the same thing to other individuals. I think it was voluntary. The people who helped give you rights made an option, made a choice to help individuals get rights. Similarly, if you want to fight the fight to pursue a cause, you should voluntarily make that choice. We don't think that people in the past were coerced into helping individuals attain rights. But we made a clear distinction that they tried to strawman. When there is a material harm that limits your ability and a direct harm that limits another person's ability to access happiness, i.e. killing, i.e. stabbing, i.e. any form of assault on a person, that is when we think individuals should not make that decision, because everything else could indirectly lower the quality of life for another person. If I'm in a recession and I lay off some workers as a high CEO, I'm also reducing the quality of life for other people. Many choices have impacts that could reduce the quality of life for other people emotionally or structurally. And we think when people make that decision, when they have no obligation to other people, there are so many choices inside opposition that limit the ability for other people to be happy. In conclusion, you have no obligation to others. When you want to be happy, you should have the ability to be happy. We wouldn't limit you and bind you to this earth.